The year is 70 AD. A Jewish priest stands on a hill outside Jerusalem and watches the Roman legions assemble below him. He does not yet know it, but he is watching the last hours of the temple of his fathers. Within 40 days, every stone of that temple and the entire mountain on which it stood will be torn apart until not one block sits upon another. That much is recorded. That much is certain. But what if, 2,000 years later, we have been mourning at the wrong wall? The Western Wall in Jerusalem is the most sacred place in Judaism. Each year, millions of people press their foreheads against its ancient stones. They write prayers and slip them into the cracks. They weep against it. They believe they are standing at the last surviving remnant of the Second Temple, the foundation stones that Roman armies could not destroy. They have believed this for almost 2,000 years. But in the year 2000, an American scholar published a book that argued they have been weeping in the wrong place. His name was Ernest L. Martin. He had spent years in Jerusalem, working alongside one of the most respected archaeologists of the 20th century. And he proposed something heretical. He proposed that the Temple of Solomon and the Temple of Herod after it never stood where the world believes they stood. He proposed that the place we call the Temple Mount today, the place over which the Dome of the Rock now glitters in the sun, was never the temple at all. It was something else. This is not speculation about a stone, or a wall, or a forgotten foundation. This is an investigation into whether the entire geopolitical conflict of our time, the impossibility of building a third temple in Jerusalem without provoking a holy war, may rest on a mistake. Because if Martin was right, the third temple could be built tomorrow without touching a single Islamic structure, in a place no one is looking. And the year 2026 may be the year the world is forced to confront the question. Stay with us. To understand the question, you have to understand what was lost. The year is 70 AD. The Roman general Titus has been besieging Jerusalem for months. The city is in its 4th year of revolt against the empire. Inside the walls, factions of Jewish defenders tear themselves apart, while starvation kills more than swords. And on the Temple Mount, the Second Temple, rebuilt and dramatically expanded by Herod the Great a generation earlier, still stands. Then, the Romans break through. The destruction that follows is recorded by an eyewitness, Flavius Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian who had defected to the Roman side. He watched the catastrophe from inside the imperial camp, beside Titus himself. His account is the most detailed we possess of the temple's final hours. And it is from Josephus that we learn what came next. An order from Titus that has echoed across 2 millennia. The order was not just to destroy the temple. The order was to demolish the entire mountain on which it stood. According to Josephus, after the temple was burned, the Roman army worked for 7 days to level the site. The platform, the foundations, the walls. By the end of it, Josephus tells us, the site was so completely flattened that a visitor would never have known anything had stood there. And 6 centuries earlier, walking past that same temple, Jesus had said something that has haunted scholars ever since. Do you see these great buildings? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Matthew chapter 24, verse 2. Not one stone. The prophecy was total. But here is the problem that has quietly bothered scholars for centuries. If the prophecy was total, and if the Roman destruction was as complete as Josephus describes, then how is it that today, when you walk through the old city of Jerusalem, you can still touch a wall? A wall built of massive Herodian stones, some weighing more than 500 tons. A wall that has stood since the time of Christ. The Western Wall. Did Titus fail to destroy it? Did the prophecy fail? Or, and this is the question one American scholar dared to ask, are we standing at the wrong wall? Ernest L. Martin was not a fringe outsider. He had earned doctorates from major American universities. He had served as an instructor at Ambassador University. And in the 1970s, he was in Jerusalem, working alongside one of the giants of biblical archaeology, Professor Benjamin Mazar, who led the famous Southern Temple Mount excavations on behalf of Hebrew University. What Martin saw during those years troubled him. The dimensions did not match. The Mishnah, the foundational rabbinic text compiled in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, gave the dimensions of the Temple Mount with precision, 500 cubits square. By any reasonable conversion, that is approximately 860 feet on each side. The Haram esh-Sharif, the platform we call the Temple Mount today, is far larger. 900 feet on one side, 1,500 feet on the other. Nearly twice the size described by the rabbis. Nearly twice the size described by Josephus himself. If the rabbinic measurement was correct, then the structure we call the Temple Mount could not have been only the temple. It had to be something larger. something else. Martin came to believe that the structure we call the Temple Mount today had never been a Jewish religious building at all. He believed it was a Roman military fortress, the fortress that Herod the Great had built next to the temple to house his guard, the fortress that the Romans expanded after the destruction, the fortress called Antonia, named after Mark Antony. According to Martin, after Titus burned the city, the Roman army did not leave. A full Roman legion, the 10th legion, Legio X Fretensis, was garrisoned in Jerusalem for the next 2 centuries. And a Roman legion required a camp of specific dimensions, capable of housing 6,000 soldiers, their officers, their supplies, their horses. The only structure in Jerusalem large enough to accommodate such a force, Martin argued, was the platform we now call the Temple Mount. If Martin was right, the implications were staggering. The Western Wall, where millions weep each year, was not the wall of the temple. It was the wall of a Roman barracks. The Dome of the Rock did not stand on the site of the Holy of Holies. It stood on the site of a Roman parade ground. And the real temple, the structure described by Solomon, by Herod, by every prophet of Israel, had stood somewhere else entirely. The real temple, in Martin's reconstruction, had stood 600 feet to the south of the modern platform, on a lower ridge, above a spring, the city of David, the original ancient Jerusalem, dating back to the time of King David himself. And the spring beneath that ridge is called the Gihon. It is the spring where Solomon was anointed king of Israel, the spring that fed the famous tunnel Hezekiah cut through solid rock when the Assyrians came, the spring beside which, according to Martin, the temple of God once stood, directly over the source of living water. Martin's theory rested on a careful rereading of Josephus. And in Josephus, scattered across thousands of paragraphs of dense Greek prose, are statements about the temple that most scholars had simply overlooked. Josephus says explicitly that the temple was built over a flowing spring. He describes water that ran through the temple complex. He uses Greek words that imply the building stood on a steeply sloping ridge. The Haram esh-Sharif, the traditional temple mount, has no spring. There is no water inside it. There never has been. But the city of David, 600 feet south, sits directly above the Gihon Spring, the only natural water source in the entire Jerusalem region. If Josephus described a temple built above flowing water, Martin asked, why are we looking for it on a dry, level platform half a mile from any water? Martin also drew attention to a moment 3 years after Jerusalem's fall. In 73 AD, the last Jewish defenders made their final stand at the fortress of Masada, a mountaintop redoubt in the Judean desert. Their leader was a man named Eleazar ben Yair, and on the night before the Romans took the fortress, he gave a speech recorded by Josephus. In that speech, Eleazar reportedly said that the city of Jerusalem had been razed to its foundations, and that the only structure still standing was the Roman camp. If the Temple Mount we know today had been the temple, Eleazar would have been describing its survival as the city's last remaining building. He didn't. He described it as the Roman camp. Robert Cornuke, an American researcher and former police investigator, took Martin's hypothesis and carried it forward through the 2000s and 2010s. Cornuke argued that the geographical and textual evidence aligned consistently with a temple in the city of David. The traditional Temple Mount, he argued, was not the right size. It had no water. It had been identified by Roman sources as a fortress, not a religious building. And the burden of proof, he insisted, sat on the side of tradition, not on the side of investigation. But the theory has not gone unchallenged. Mainstream archaeologists, most notably Leen Ritmeyer, who like Martin worked at Mazar's excavations in Jerusalem, have argued forcefully against it. Ritmeyer paints to a fundamental problem in Martin's reading of Josephus. Josephus says the destruction of Antonia took only 7 days. If Martin is right, and Antonia was actually the entire Temple Mount platform, a structure 35 times larger than the conventional Antonia Tower, then demolishing it in a week would have been physically impossible. Ritmeyer also identifies specific bedrock features at the northwest corner of the modern Temple Mount that match descriptions of the smaller, conventional Antonia Tower. The scholarly establishment, by and large, has rejected Martin's hypothesis. The traditional location remains the consensus. But the theory has not died. And in 2026, for reasons no one in Martin's lifetime could have anticipated, it has become more relevant than ever.
In Israel today, a preparation is underway that almost no one in the West fully understands. For more than 3 decades, an organization called the Temple Institute, based in Jerusalem, has been systematically rebuilding every object required by ancient law for temple service. Priestly garments woven from authentic materials, a golden menorah hammered from a single talent of gold, the altar of incense, the showbread table, the instruments for sacrifice, everything except the building itself. And in recent years, the most controversial preparation of all has accelerated. The breeding of red heifers. Perfect, unblemished red cows, whose ashes are required, according to the 6th book of Moses, to ritually purify any priest who will enter the rebuilt temple. In 2022, 5 red heifer calves were flown from Texas to Israel. They were raised under careful supervision in Shiloh. 2 have since been disqualified for imperfect markings. In July of 2025, a ceremony was conducted in Samaria. It was reported around the world as the long-awaited red heifer sacrifice. But weeks later, the Temple Institute and the Sanhedrin issued official statements clarifying that the ceremony was a simulation, a practice, not a qualified sacrifice. Their statement was precise. When we are ready, the real red heifer will be made, God willing. Translation: the preparations are not complete, but they are advancing. At the same time, the political status of the Temple Mount itself has been shifting. In recent years, a series of visits by senior Israeli political figures, including, on the holy day of Tisha B'Av, the country's Minister of National Security publicly praying on the Temple Mount in defiance of long-standing international agreements, has signaled what observers describe as a deliberate erosion of the existing arrangement. The number of Jewish visitors to the Mount has reached record levels. The political pressure for Jewish prayer rights at the site has reached its highest point since the Six-Day War of 1967. Something is moving.
And here, finally, the controversial theory of Ernest Martin meets the headlines of 2026 in a way that almost no one is talking about. If the traditional location is correct, if the temple was indeed where the Dome of the Rock now stands, then the third temple cannot be built without removing one of the holiest sites in Islam. The result would be regional war, perhaps global war. This is not speculation. This is the math of the present moment. But if Martin was right, if the original temple stood not on the Haram esh-Sharif, but on the city of David, 600 feet to the south, then the third temple could be built tomorrow on its actual original site, without touching the Dome of the Rock, without provoking a single Islamic objection. The geopolitical lock that has held for 13 centuries would simply dissolve. Now stand back and consider what we have. An American scholar working in Jerusalem in the 1970s. A theory most archaeologists reject. A massive platform that may or may not have been a temple, a fortress, or both. A spring beneath a hill that may or may not mark the true Holy of Holies. Red heifers in a paddock in Shiloh. A minister praying on a forbidden mountain. A world holding its breath about which spark will set off the next war. All of it hinging on one question. Where was the temple? We do not know the answer with certainty. The archaeological consensus says one thing. The textual evidence, reread by Martin and Cornuke, says another. The geopolitical implications of either being right are profound. And the 2026 calendar of red heifer preparations, political shifts, and apocalyptic expectations now meets a 2,000-year-old question
at exactly the moment when the answer would matter most. But before we close this investigation, there is one thing the ancient prophets said about the temple that, in all the political and archaeological noise, almost no one is repeating. They said the temple of the future would not be like the temples of the past. The prophet Ezekiel saw a temple of immense scale, but also of immense strangeness, with water flowing out from beneath its threshold, healing the desert as it went. The prophet Zechariah described a temple built not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. And in the Gospel of John, walking past the building that Herod had spent 46 years constructing, Jesus turned to his critics and said something that nobody at the time understood. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. John chapter 2, verse 19. The gospel writer tells us plainly that he was not speaking of stone. He was speaking of his body. It is possible that the world will spend the next 12 months arguing about cubits and rocks and the precise coordinates of a building destroyed 2,000 years ago. It is possible that armies will form, or fail to form, around the answer. It is possible that 2026 will be remembered as the year the question reached its peak. But it is also possible, quietly, in a way the news cycle does not register, that the prophets of Israel were pointing to something the cameras cannot photograph. A temple not built of stones. A holy of holies not measured in cubits. A presence not buried under any rubble Roman armies could pile up. And if so, the question is not where the next temple will be built. The question is whether we have been looking still in the wrong place. The world is watching the mountain. The Bible quietly speaks of a man